Thank you so much, Dr. Pardo. And now, last speaker, our dessert, is Dr. מאיר Litvak, the Litvak of Shiite scholars of 19th century Iraq, the ulama of Najaf and Karbala. Just the other day, I consulted the very new Cambridge history of the Ottoman Empire, and how glad I was to see that Meir Litvak is there quoted and quoted and quoted. That book had really become a classic. He wrote a lot of other, he had many other publications, books and articles, and he's a member of the department here, Middle Eastern History, Dayan, Iranian Center. What else, Meir? Okay, Meir, you've got 20 minutes, please. This course, the attitude towards the West in the Iranian Republic.
Thank you. Not the public, but the discourse of the regime, there's a difference. My lecture will be very dry compared to Eldad's. I apologize. I'm a Litvak after all. One of the principal elements of the evolving Islamic ideology that preceded the 1979 revolution was the dichotomy, in Hamid Dabashi's words, between the injured self and the hostile other. The injured self, as was collectively created, was the most compelling force in the contemporary Iranian psyche. The hostile other is the visceral denial of the West. More than anything else, Dabashi adds, it was this collective discontent against the imaginative construction called the West that animated the revolutionary movement. Now, every group in history or in society defines itself in opposition to a certain other, which usually represents the negative and attributes and characteristics opposite to the group's self-image. And in the Iranian case, therefore, the changing attitudes toward the West can shed light on the evolving self-view of the Iranian elites since the revolution. Now, the animosity toward the West, manifested in the label Great Satan, Shaitan Buzurg, for the US, has remained a prominent theme in the ideology and discourse of the Islamic government to the present day. Yet, the growing self-confidence of the Iranian elites in recent years, as Iran overcame a series of internal crises and external challenges, produced two new approaches to the West. One, which was represented by former President Mohammad Khatami, saw no harm in a limited opening to the West, as it no longer feared that Western culture would undermine or destroy Iran's Islamic identity. The other approach, represented primarily by current President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, demonstrates a growing disdain and contempt toward the West. This approach views the West as a decadent civilization undergoing decline, while it projects self-confidence that the Muslim world, with Iran playing a leading role in this world, are the rising forces in the global arena. This approach is not unique, by the way, to Iranian spokesmen, and can be found also in the statements of some Sunni radicals, such as the Qatar-based Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi. Now, what I'll do in this presentation is I will seek to analyze the changing attitudes toward the West and explain the reasons behind it and its significance. Now, the choice of the term Satan, Shaitan, referred to the multiple threats posed by Western American culture, just like the Quranic Satan, Al-Waswas, the whisperer, who whispers in the believer's soul. You know, the surah, Al-Waswas alladhi yuwaswisu fi suduri nas. Just as Satan whispers in the soul of the believers in order to lure the Muslim away from God and religion, so does Western culture appeals to the basest, lowest human traits, such as greed and sexual desires, and therefore its great appeal among misguided Muslims. In addition, as Abbas Amanat has shown, the emphasis on the polluting aspects that the satanic temptations associated with Western culture, such as music, paintings, movies, and unveiled women, this polluting aspect has on the believer's body and soul resonates well with the essentiality of ritual purity in Shiite doctrine and popular beliefs. Now, the depiction of the US as the Great Satan was intended also, among other things, to ensure a complete conflict between Iran and the West, not just historically, but also from an eschatological point of view. Now, just as the Quranic Satan seeks to distance the believers from God, so, according to Khomeini, do the modern satanic forces, consisting of the West and the Jews, who conspire against the Muslims in order to extirpate Islam and sow doubt and confusion in the hearts of Muslims. Working together with local westernized intellectuals, they particularly sought to undermine Islam's most important feature, such as being a comprehensive and total system of law that governs society and state, by planting the false idea that Islam is only concerned with rituals and faith, as was the case with Christianity. The reason for these satanic forces for targeting Islam was the realization that Islam and its laws were the main obstacles in the path of their materialistic ambitions. In addition, Khomeini says, the West resisted the righteous cause of Islam to expand to the four corners of the earth, of the globe. Adding a strong nationalist grievance to this religious argument, Khomeini accused the US-led West of enslaving Iran and viciously exploiting its resources by using the Pahlavi monarchs as their local proxies. But he added, after the revolution, even now, when the hands of the US had been cut off from Iran's resources, thanks to the revolution, the US, or the Satan, never ceased in plotting against Iran by all means of its disposal. Khomeini kept his animosity toward the West until his death. His political will and testament, Vasiyat Nameh, contains at least 21 charges against and warnings of the dangers of the oppressive pagan West to Islam. In particular, he described the US as the foremost enemy of Islam, a terrorist state by nature that has set fire to everything and everywhere. Echoing the Iranian author Jalal Ali Ahmed and the black psychiatrist from Martinique, Frantz Fanon, Khomeini expressed his wrath at the harm caused to Iran by westernized intellectuals who have become alienated with their true selves and were estranged from their own, with their own cultures as they came to regard the peoples of the superpowers as being of races and cultures superior to their own. However, already in this document that was written, the first draft was written 6 years before Khomeini died and sort of maybe amended just before his death, you can see already a certain change in his attitude, as Iran is no longer depicted or referred to as a hapless victim of Western conspiracies, but as a state that, thanks to Islam, was able to stand on its own, and therefore Khomeini adds with great satisfaction that following the revolution, the US has been dumbfounded and disgraced in its dealings with the fearless Iranian nation. Khomeini's likening of the US to the great Satan became a prominent theme in Iran's revolutionary discourse and has continued since 1979 to serve as the rallying point of affirming popular and national support for the revolution. But because of time constraints, I have no distance to travel to Tel Aviv, I will survey here only a few of the major themes of this discourse. Now, Khomeini's successor, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, preserved his mentor's animosity toward the West. Khamenei's speeches in the past 20 years are replete with warnings about the plots and threats of the enemy, primarily associated with the West and the US against Iran. His greatest concern, however, was not so much a US military invasion of Iran, but a Western-led cultural offensive, Tahajom Farhangi, designed to bring about the demise of the Islamic system in Iran in the same way as it brought down communism, the communist system in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. This cultural offensive meant a concerted effort to spread Western vice and cultural influence in order to undermine the roots of Iran's traditional society, create popular disillusionment with the Islamic system, and foment ethnic and sectarian unrest, and create cleavages among the country's political elites. Khamenei made a clear distinction between necessary cultural exchange, that is, peaceful borrowing of the fruits of science and knowledge from others, from a position of strength, and the evil cultural offensive. Now, a model of positive cultural exchange, as he describes, was the peaceful borrowing of Islamic culture by the peoples and rulers of Southeast Asia several centuries ago. By contrast, the Western cultural offensive is nothing but war by other means. which the West wages in order to uproot Iran's national culture and forcibly impose upon it new beliefs through missionaries and westernized intellectuals in order to achieve political domination over Iran. On various occasions, Khamenei equated the Western cultural offensive with a cultural act of plunder and a cultural massacre. Now, confronting the appeal of Western culture to the post-revolutionary Iranian youth, Khamenei warned that the Western cultural offensive aimed first at the believing youth with the aim of luring them away from Islam toward worldly corruption, thereby paving the way for the Western takeover of Iran society. Khamenei's determination to counter the appeal of Western culture or ideas among Iranians, again particularly the educated youth who grew up under the Islamic Revolution, was manifested in his constant effort to denigrate Western culture. Thus, as one example, during the debate in Iran, or as part of the debate in Iran over the merits of democracy that was held in the late 1990s during the first tenure of Khatami's presidency, Khamenei extended great effort to show the fallacy of Western liberal democracy. He argued that Western democracy was nothing but a dictatorship under a new garb, which was based on false and deceptive propaganda. While he extolled the freedoms granted by the Iranian constitution, he dismissed the freedom of expression in the West as a sham. He pointed, for instance, to the uproar in France and action taken against the writer Roger Garoudi, who denied the Jewish Holocaust as a proof of suppressing freedom of expression in the West for those who were not affiliated with the capitalists or the Zionists. In contrast to Khamenei's blatant rejection of the West, former President Khatami espoused the view more common among Islamic modernists since Muhammad Abduh, which adhered to the belief in the moral and spiritual superiority of Islam over the West, but did not ignore some of the West's positive aspects. To some extent, this approach resembled the openness of Muslims in the Abbasid period to Greek culture, an openness that stemmed from a position of strength and superiority. When Khatami addressed the issue of Western civilization in his scholarly writings before he became president, he described the West as the birthplace of a new civilization. He acknowledged that this was the age of the dominance and entrenchment of Western civilization, intellectually, morally, and technologically. He agreed that the West has made great strides in science, politics, and social regulations. But he qualified this with the claim that would later become a dominant theme in the Iranian discourse, that the West is already worn out and senile. Since civilizations influence each other, Khatami advocated a dialogue between civilizations both for political and cultural purposes. In line with Islamic modernism, he rejected the conservative view that shut itself from the world, but also those who were intoxicated, he used the term abhurun, from the West, and proposed instead a critical and selective borrowing of positive elements from the West, while staying clear of its defects and relying on our own revolutionary values. Consequently, while he was critical of U.S. foreign policy, Khatami tried to advance a dialogue and rapprochement with the U.S., but was rebuffed by the conservatives in the Iranian elite and by Khamenei himself. The conservative backlash in Iran, which started in the year 2000 during Khatami's tenure and culminated in the election of Ahmadinejad as president in 2005, marked a shift in the Iranian discourse on the West. While it still depicted the U.S. as Satan and as a false idol, which wages a cultural offensive against Iran's Islamic culture, the Iranian tone became increasingly triumphal, portraying the West as doomed to decline, with Islam gradually and inevitably returning to its rightful leading role in history. At the same time, the new discourse is profoundly nationalist, reflecting great pride in the qualities and gains of the Iranian nation. Indeed, a major theme of the new discourse is the success of the revolution, not only in bringing Iran back to its true self and identity, but also in restoring Iran's actual, not only nominal, independence vis-à-vis the West, independence which has been lost since the 19th century, and in paving the way for the restorations of Iran's historical glory. The emergence of the new discourse can be attributed to several processes. One is that the resilience of the revolutionary government, which overcame a series of external and domestic challenges, definitely enhanced the self-confidence of the Iranian elite in its ability to stand up to the West. Ahmadinejad's elections also marked the rise of a new generation, the graduates of the Iran-Iraq War, into prominence, with the aim, and this rising generation rose with the aim of and the determination to rekindle the original spirit of the revolution, which has faded in the 1990s. Members of this generation were not traumatized, as their predecessors, by American intervention in Iranian domestic affairs, which culminated in the 1953 toppling of Mohammad Mossadegh. Instead, they matured with the belief that Iran was robbed of victory in its war against Iraq due to Western conspiracies. More importantly, the regional changes following the U.S. invasion to Iraq and the ongoing U.S. stumbling in the Iraqi quagmire, extensively discussed in this conference, especially yesterday, enhanced the belief of this new generation in the inevitable decline of the West and in Iran's rise to regional leadership. Ahmadinejad's open letter to George Bush, which emulated the letters written by the Prophet Muhammad to the Emperor of Byzantine Empire and other kings, in which in these letters Muhammad admonished those monarchs to retract from their evil ways and endorse the call of Islam, Ahmadinejad's letter reflects the new approach. In a seemingly friendly but patronizing tone, Ahmadinejad pointed to the lessons of history, which, I quote, tell us that the repressive and cruel governments, such as the US government, do not survive. He claimed that those with insight can already hear the sounds of the shattering and fall of the ideology and thought of the liberal democratic system, whereas the people around the world are flocking toward God. He ended with the question whether Bush wanted to join these global masses in coming back to God. Now, while the letter spoke of monotheistic prophets, Ahmadinejad's references to these prophets reflected the Islamic interpretation of the prophets and their messages, and his appeal to Bush to follow their path in fact meant and was widely interpreted as urging Bush to adopt the Islamic way of life. Something similar, by the way, Khomeini did to Gorbachev in the late 1980s. The global economic crisis, which erupted since mid-2008, reinforced Iran's confidence in the coming fall of the West. Ayatollah Ahmed Janati, Secretary of the Council of Guardians, described the crisis as divine punishment for America's sins, while Ahmadinejad explained the crisis as the natural outcome of the Western moral crisis. It has been around 200 years, he said, since the Westerners declared that society should be free of moral values, of religion, of the teachings of the prophets, and of divine values. The capitalist era had come to an end, he stated elsewhere, and the world should adopt a new system, a new economic system based on religious, spiritual, and non-usury principles, that is Islam. As Iran advanced in its nuclear efforts and in view of its increasing regional influence, the triumphal tone grew louder. Here again I quote Ahmadinejad, who says, "Our beloved Imam," Ahmadinejad appeals to Khomeini, "you commanded that the arrogant powers of the world must be destroyed. You commanded that the global rule of hegemony must be removed. I'd like to say that thanks to your illuminating presence, thanks to your guidance, and thanks to the steadfastness of the Iranian nation, today the cruel and arrogant powers have reached the total dead end, and thanks to God, the countdown for the decline of America's demonic power has begun." On other occasions, Ahmadinejad declared that America's straw-like strength and satanic rule over the world is about to be annihilated, and he expressed his confidence that America's collapse and the process of disintegration of its satanic rule has begun. Not surprisingly, various Iranian spokesmen began to boast that in the current global confrontation between spirit, represented by the Islamic Revolution, and ego, represented by the US, even Western thinkers believe that the power of the West is declining and they feel threatened by the rising power of Islam. And that the world's Muslim, with Iran's under Iran's leadership pose the main danger to America's hegemony. Drawing parallels between the U.S. self-acclaimed leadership of the West with Iran, Hassan Rahimpour Arazadi of the Iranian Supreme Council for Cultural Evolution asked rhetorically, why don't we take upon ourselves the responsibility for leading the Islamic awakening? Why shouldn't we be the spokesman for the Islamic world? Why do they, that is the Americans, decide for everybody? Why shouldn't we decide for them? Amir Mohebian, editor of the conservative Risalat, for his part, pondered whether the destiny of the Islamic Republic, maybe in 50 years, is to lead the Muslim bloc that would rival the United States, Europe, and China for global influence. Now, to conclude, 30 years after the revolution, the West continues to be the ultimate other and the source of evil for the Iranian elites, although the deep sense of insult and humiliation has been partially replaced by a sense of empowerment or even by arrogance over the imminent decline of the West. Paradoxically, or even through, you can say, the cunning of history, a more positive attitude toward the West appears among some segments of the Iranian population due to the increasing disillusionment from the Islamic utopia promised by the revolution. Such sentiments occasionally prompted Iranian leaders to take an apologetic stand while rejecting various attractive aspects of Western culture. Therefore, it is difficult to assess the level of popular acceptance of this new triumphant approach which I've described. Now, in a way, we can speak of a sort of a closing of a circle. Under the Shah, westernized elites grew apart from the vast majority of Iranians who were alienated from the West and clung to the Islamic and national traditions. Today, substantial segments from the public apparently feel less threatened from, and more attracted to various aspects of Western culture, whereas the ruling elite feel both animosity and certain superiority toward the West, or over the West. Now, if indeed such a gap exists today, but a different gap between masses and elites, it is difficult to assess its long-term impact on Iran's domestic policy making. In the foreign policy realm too, the new approach, that is the arrogant, superior approach of the Iranian elite, is reflected in a more assertive foreign policy. But this issue belongs to other panels of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Litvak. I knew I could rely on you. I didn't even have to remind you that your time is over.